So my name is Russ Derry. I'm the Director of Education at Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan. And our Learn and Share conference call today is entitled Cannabis for Epilepsy, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Gregory Barkley with us from the Henry Ford Comprehensive Epilepsy Center. Dr. Barkley, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. It's nice to be here, Russ.
Great. So can you just start by giving us a brief summary of your clinical and research interests and your experience with this topic?
Well, I started as a co-founder of the Henry Ford Comprehensive Epilepsy Program in 1987, so I have been doing this for quite a while, and I've been involved with a variety of research projects involving most of the anticonvulsant drugs that are now on the market. And over the years, I've also listened to what patients have told me about how they've tried to control their seizures. And since early in my practice, people have told me about the benefits of cannabis. And when studies started to show the development of cannabis as medicine for epilepsy, I became very interested in that. So today, what I will do as you ask me questions, I'm going to try and give short answers with the assumption that don't know much about this topic, and I hope that we leave plenty of time for questions, because with the large number of folks on the line, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's start by just talking about the cannabis plant and why it has been used over the years for a variety of medical purposes. So can you just give a brief overview of cannabis, the different parts of the plant that are used, the primary components that have or are thought to have medicinal value, and then some of the conditions or symptoms that it can help treat?
Okay, the cannabis plant is the name of a single plant called by various names, because there are different strains that are grown in different parts of the world. Most people are familiar with the name Cannabis Sativa, which is the name of the plant that was originally cultivated in China, and its cultivation started about 12,000 years ago, and it was a major plant for both the commercial development for its use as rope and cloth, but also for medicinal purposes from the very start. It is also known as Cannabis indica for the plant that grows in India, and both those plants share a couple of similar characteristics. They have to have a certain amount of daylight and darkness in order to flower, and we'll get to the flower later. There is a third strain of cannabis that was discovered less than 100 years ago growing out in Siberia. That's called Cannabis Ruderalis, and it's a small little kind of a Charlie Brown Christmas tree of a plant that only grows 2 or 3 feet tall, but because it grows far north, it flowers automatically in about 28 days. Now, all three of these strains of cannabis have been interbred, and so just as every apple and tomato you buy is a hybrid, every strain of cannabis that one purchase is also a hybrid of some sort. Any one that is said to be auto-flowering is one that has a lot of the Cannabis Ruderalis strain in it, as opposed to the other two, which are as tricky to get to flower as it is to get a poinsettia plant to flower a second time when you have one in your home. The Chinese plant grows to be 20 feet tall, whereas the Indian plant only grows to be 5 or 6 feet tall. There is a strain of cannabis that is called the hemp plant, and it's the same plant as the other ones I've mentioned, except that it has been selectively bred to have no THC, which is the cannabinoid that makes people feel high when they ingest it. And the hemp plant has been grown in North America since 1606, when it was first planted in Nova Scotia. And it was a major plant in colonial times, both in Canada and the U.S. and was cultivated commercially up until about the 1950s in the United States, but its commercial growing was inhibited by the laws against marijuana, particularly the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. So we have several of these plants, and the other thing to know about cannabis is that its word cannabis means the fragrant cane plant. And the closest relative to the cannabis plant is the hops plant, which gives beer its characteristic taste and flavors. And similar to the hops plant, cannabis has strong aromas and flavors. And so just as some people like the taste of beer, others do not, the same can be said for the cannabis plant.
Okay. And what parts of the plant are typically used then in for medicinal purposes? Obviously, the stalks have been used for rope and things like that. But
well, the entire plant can be used for medicinal purposes. And to illustrate this, let me have people imagine the broccoli plant. If you go to the store and you buy a clump of broccoli, what people typically do is they chop off the tops and they cook those up because they're tasty and tender. If you actually bit into the stalk of a broccoli plant, it would be it had the same flavors, but it's tough and fibrous. So what happens in cannabis plants is that the flower portion of the plant is chopped off and sold at a premium price. And then the rest of the plant is then ground up, and the cannabinoids that are the active ingredients are extracted into an oil formulation. At home, what people do is they will chop up the plant and they'll throw it into a boiling pot of oil and water, where the oil could be butter or olive oil or some sort of olive oil, and boil it for a period of time, and then they strain off the plant material with cheesecloths or something and discard the water layer, and they now have an oil layer that has cannabinoids, the various compounds that we're talking about, plus other biological products such as terpenes and flavonoids, which may also have some important biological properties as medicines.
Okay. And other than epilepsy, which we'll be focusing on today, what are some of the other conditions or symptoms that it is often used to treat? Well,
there are approved uses for cannabis compounds for nausea, and there are synthetic. There's a synthetic THC on the market in the United States called dronabinol, and there is a product that is a mixture of THC and CBD, which I will define those words later, that's available in Canada. In Europe, that's used for pain control and treatment of spasticity and multiple sclerosis, among other things. So the major current uses of cannabis products are for seizures, for treatment of pain, spasticity, nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy, and with THC, it's also been used for stimulation of appetite, although CBD, which we'll get to in high doses, seems to have the opposite effect on appetite in some people.
Okay. So what are you've mentioned a couple of them, but what are the key components of cannabis that may help people with epilepsy specifically, both with seizure control and with other epilepsy-related symptoms? And then how do they work specifically on the brain?
There are a series of compounds made within the body that are delivered just at the time they're needed for various purposes. Those are called cannabinoids. The ones made in the body are called endocannabinoids. And it just so happens that the cannabis plant has similar compounds that act at the same receptor sites throughout the body that are called phytocannabinoids. The marijuana plant has approximately 50 to 100 various cannabinoids depending on the strain of plant that is grown. The cannabinoid system is in place to help people relax, digest. It has some effects in immunity, strengthening immunity, fighting off infections, and in pain control. And it also helps promote sleep. So those are the natural things. In fact, one of the terms that people often hear talked about is the runner's high that athletes get when they are exercising, and people often incorrectly say that's part of the body's natural narcotic system, but it actually turns out that this is part of the body's endocannabinoid system at work.
Okay. And can you talk specifically about CBD and THC and their value in both seizure control and other symptoms that people with epilepsy may experience?
Sure. So while there may be approximately 100 cannabinoids, there are two that are of major interest. THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, is the compound that has made marijuana infamous or famous, depending on your point of view. And this compound, when inhaled or ingested into the body, produces the high that's associated with marijuana. It binds to a specific receptor in the brain called the CB1 receptor. And it has its effects of euphoria, enhancement of appetite, suppression of nausea as three of its primary functions. CBD, or cannabidiol, is a cannabinoid that does not have any effects on mood and any direct effects. So people who use it say they don't feel much different, perhaps maybe a bit more relaxed, but they don't feel high by any means. So it's said to be a non-psychotropic cannabinoid. And CBD has been the major focus of the epilepsy research, so that there has been development of a product that is being readied for FDA approval for treatment of epilepsy that is a pure CBD cannabinoid.
Okay, great. And let's talk about that. Epidiolex is the purified CBD extract that's currently being studied in patients with 4 types of pediatric epilepsy: Dravet syndrome, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, tuberous sclerosis complex, and infantile spasms. Can you review the key safety and efficacy findings of the Epidiolex clinical trials that have been released so far?
Be happy to. So the product Epidiolex is an oil that is sesame seed oil with highly purified CBD, and it has a concentration of 100 milligrams of CBD per ml, which is a very potent concentration. And the company that is developing it has been given a fast-track approval process by the FDA, and has been given what's called orphan drug designation for these rare syndromes. And they are in the process of doing the classic kinds of studies that every other FDA-approved anti-seizure medicine has undergone in order to gain approval. And so at this time, they have completed several studies. There are still some in progress. And in fact, there will be the second trial in Dravet syndrome is going to be reported at the end of the month at the next American Academy of Neurology meeting. And there are trials underway in tuberous sclerosis and infantile spasms. But the first trial in Dravet syndrome has been presented, and they've also presented the first trial in Lennox-Gastaut, and the second trial in Lennox-Gastaut will also be presented at the end of the month. So for people who aren't familiar with Dravet syndrome, you probably are familiar with Charlotte Figi, who is the little girl who's had a lot of fame because of her early use of CBD oil for the treatment of her epilepsy. And she has been on many TV specials, and I think you can find her pretty easily. But Dravet syndrome is an inherited epilepsy syndrome that has been often very difficult to treat. The Lennox-Gastaut syndrome is another particularly severe epilepsy in which people typically have multiple seizure types, the most dangerous of which is the drop attacks, and for which most people wear helmets, and it's associated with cognitive impairment. And so the clinical trials have all involved doses of approximately 20 milligrams per kilogram per day of Epidiolex versus a placebo being added on to standard therapy. In the first Dravet syndrome trial, for example, the children were of an average age of about 10 years old. They were having an average of 13 convulsive seizures per month, despite taking an average of 3 medications and having failed 4 other drug therapy options. And in the first Dravet trial, during the treatment, the patients and the physicians did not know who was getting the drug and who was getting a placebo. And so the results showed that there was a 39% reduction in the rate of convulsive seizures on the CBD oil compared to the placebo, which is a very impressive result. The side effects were low, and there were no life-threatening side effects. But typically, the common side effects, which has been also seen, the same pattern of side effects have been seen in the Lennox-Gastaut trials, were sleepiness, decreased appetite. There were some people with some diarrhea or vomiting, and there was a small group who had fever, but the placebo group almost had the same percentage of fever. Now, one has to remember that when doing clinical trials, the fever is a good point. And you take kids who are, say, 5 to 15 years of age, and you watch them for 3 months. It's not surprising that a number of them get infections with a fever. And so when looking at any drug study, it's important to see what is the percentage of fever in the treatment group compared to the placebo group. And in the treatment group with the Lennox-Gastaut trial, the rate of fever was 12.8%, and it was 8.2% in the placebo group. Not much of a difference. So that tells you that that's probably just something that happened in that population. On the other hand, diarrhea in the Lennox-Gastaut was seen in 18%, but only 8% of the placebo group. So one would say that it seems reasonable that a possible side effect of this high-dose CBD therapy could be diarrhea. So both of these trials, both of these syndromes seem to be responsive to high CBD, and once 2 placebo-controlled double-blind trials have been performed, then the company will have enough information to submit to the FDA, so they could submit for approval for this drug by later this year, and with fast-tracked status, it could possibly be approved if everything goes well by sometime in 2018.
Okay, and were the seizure reduction rates similar for Lennox-Gastaut as they were for the Dravet syndrome group?
The Lennox-Gastaut has many different seizure types, and the key with Lennox-Gastaut is that the seizure that was the one that was focused on was the drop seizure rate, and the mean reduction in drop seizures was twice as high in the treatment group as the placebo group during the test phase. And there were actually some of the children who were treated became free of drop attacks during the trial while being treated with CBD. About 5 out of 80 to 90 children stopped having drop attacks entirely, whereas none of the placebo-treated group had their drop attacks stop.
Okay, great. So in addition to the side effects we mentioned, cannabis may also interact with anti-seizure medications. What are some of the possible interactions that have been identified through the Epidiolex trials and through other research or through your clinical experience?
Well, the most important thing is that there is a clear relationship between the use of the Epidiolex and an elevation in the levels of clobazam, which is also marketed as under the brand name of Onfi. So that if you were adding CBD to somebody taking this, you would have to take that into account and drop the dose. The other major anti-seizure drugs didn't really have much of a difference in their drug levels during the course of therapy. But I think it's important to say that if you're already on more than one seizure medication and you add another drug, then you always have to be aware that there can be the combined effects of multiple drugs, and so you have to be sure that you don't start feeling over-medicated, no matter which. If you took any 3 or 4 anti-seizure medicines, that's always a concern, and trying to weigh the beneficial effects of control of seizures with the side effects of just feeling too much medication.
Right. Is there any evidence to suggest that people with certain types of epilepsy or other clinical or demographic characteristics may benefit more or less from cannabis than others?
We don't know enough to say much scientifically. There is, if you go on the internet, you can find individual reports, and anybody who takes care of people with epilepsy will find that people with all kinds of seizure types have reported beneficial improvements, but many anecdotes don't make scientific studies. I guess it would be fair to say that the cannabinoids have a broad spectrum of activity against many different seizure types. And we're just scratching the surface of a whole class of very promising compounds.
Right.
The other thing it's important to add is that there may be benefit from not only the cannabinoids, but some of these other compounds, terpenes and flavonoids, are often classified as antioxidants. And if you go on to PubMed.gov, you can search under some of these terms, and you'll find that in small animal research studies that there may be beneficial effects of these. So I think we have a whole host of potentially beneficial compounds that are going to come onto the market and be developed as new ways to help people live well with epilepsy.
Okay, great. And you mentioned early the orphan drug designation. So there was, or there is an expanded access and compassionate use program for Epidiolex, which has in the past provided access to the medication for people who are not enrolled in the clinical trials. However, it's currently not reviewing any applications other than those cases that are considered emergencies or life-threatening. So until that program opens up again or Epidiolex is approved by the FDA, people will have to access CBD and other cannabis products in less refined forms. So can you talk about the different cannabis strains, forms, and routes of administration that are currently available to patients in Michigan?
Michigan is one of the states that has approved medical marijuana. In fact, most states have, people living in most states have access to medical marijuana. And a few states have opened access to marijuana to anyone who wants to use it. There are only a few states where you theoretically cannot get marijuana. So if someone wants to use a cannabinoid, there are a couple of different routes. My experience with my patients is that most people who want to use marijuana for epilepsy are not interested in smoking marijuana unless they were already smoking marijuana for other reasons before. So that the vast majority of people using marijuana are using it as an oil that is taken on a daily basis, just the same way that any other medication is taken. The cannabis compounds can be prepared in a way that they can be absorbed through the mucosa of which is the surface of the inside of the mouth, or even the inside the nasal cavity, and the the Sativex preparation, which is the preparation of a mixture of 50-50 of THC and CBD, which is sold in Canada and Europe, is sold as a spray that you spray into the mouth. So that's a way to avoid swallowing medication. But for most people, the use of cannabis is as an oil that is similar to, say, taking cough syrup. You measure out a certain amount, put it in a spoon, and swallow it. Some of the patients, as I mentioned, of mine have reported that depending on how it's been extracted, and we're talking about a world of difference between a pharmaceutical company that has following very strict FDA rules about purity and extraction methods so that every batch is the same, to people who are growing it and extracting it so each batch may test out a little bit differently or may not even be tested at all. And the oil can be any number of different kinds of oils, and they may not be the same. So when you're buying cannabis oils with CBD in them, you have to be careful what you're doing to know how much you're taking and what the actual product you're using is. I recommend to my patients to take advantage of testing laboratories to either have their products that they're buying sampled themselves, and I think the cost of that is $40 to $50, or to go onto websites of testing laboratories to find where the products have been tested recently and where those can be purchased. In Michigan, in order to purchase cannabis products from dispensaries, one has to have a card, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. But then you go in, you can buy those at the dispensaries once you have a card. One can also buy over the internet hemp oils, and hemp oils that contain high amounts of CBD are sold and can be readily found, and there are a number of them are available. I'm trying not to mention brand names, but since I've already mentioned Charlotte Fiji, her story is kind of interesting. When her mother, Paige, moved them from Florida to Colorado to get medical marijuana, Paige, being like any caring mother, didn't want to give her daughter something that would make a 7-year-old child high, so she found a strain that had no THC in it. It was at that time called Hippie's Disappointment because it didn't have any euphoric effects. And that's what Paige was originally given and then was renamed Charlotte's Web oil in her honor, and can be purchased as a hemp oil now on the internet. There are many other ones that are available, and when I see patients in clinic, I have a list of ones that I have gathered from patients and learned about that I suggest they can go take a look at and see if that's something they're interested in trying. So hemp oils can be sold without, or be purchased without having a medical marijuana card.
Okay. So you mentioned the medical marijuana card, so can you briefly review the application process for the Michigan Medical Marijuana Program and what the registry identification card legally entitles the patient to do?
Sure. The medical marijuana card came out of a citizen's petition that was circulated in Michigan and voted on in November 4th, 2008. And it was drafted in a way that first of all, the election, it was supported by the majority of people in every county of the state. So there was a broad support for the use of marijuana for medical purposes. The list of conditions that qualify for the card are quite varied. One of them is seizures. Another is chronic pain, cancer, AIDS, and there are some kind of strange things like nail patella syndrome, which most people have never heard of. And, of course, the very famous glaucoma, which is not a very good use. Marijuana is not a very good compound for that, but it was certainly made famous by Bob Marley back and Peter Tosh in their songs that they sang back in the 80s. So in order to qualify, it's not a prescription from a physician. Any physician can fill out the form. There's a downloadable application process from the Licensing and Regulatory Authority, which is called LARA, from the state of Michigan. One can look that up. And the form has 3 pages for adults. The first page is just an instruction sheet with where you're supposed to mail in the completed form. The second page has a top part is for the patient to fill in, and is indicated by the letter P. There is a bottom half, which is an optional caregiver portion, which is indicated by the letter C. And then in between there is a question whether a person will possess the plants or that the caregiver will possess the plants. And if you're filling out the form as a patient, unless you're growing it yourself, you check the box that says, my caregiver will possess the plants. If you are just buying it for yourself, then you would just fill in the patient portion. If you were buying it or wanted the card and you wanted a caregiver, so your spouse or one of your children could also go pick up the cannabis for you, then both halves of that second page would be filled out. There is a $60 charge for the patient to get a card, and an additional $25 if a caregiver wants to is going to have a card. The application, to do the application properly, you have to make a Xerox of an accepted photo ID, such as a driver's license if you have it, or a state ID card. It has to have a photo accepted government ID that gets sent along. And the one piece of advice is that this is like filling in your tax forms. You have to fill out everything correctly. They don't want to see strikeovers. One of the common reasons that forms get returned is people forget to put their middle name, or at least their middle initial. If you have no middle name, you have to write no middle name in that box. For the physician fills in answers a number of questions about his or her practice, including the doctor's license number, and then enters the patient's first name, middle initial, and last name with the date of birth, and then which of the qualifying conditions, and then the physician signs it and gives it to the patient to send in. Within about 3 weeks of receiving the form, the patient should receive back a card in the mail. One of the the card has a space for a photo, but there is no photo on the card. So patients sometimes ask about that. If the application is for a child, it takes the patient part looks very similar, except that the guardian fills out the portion, and then that requires 2 physicians to fill in the form for pediatric patients. And so the process is, the process is essentially the same.
Okay. And then what, again, does that legally entitle you to do in terms of growing plants or possessing or purchasing plants?
Well, there was just a change there was a major legislative effort just passed in the last couple of weeks, which is changing a lot of aspects of the Michigan medical marijuana distribution method. Prior to this change, it was kind of the Wild West in terms of no regulations to speak of. The newest, and I don't know all the details of this, but the newest aspect is that there are a variety of fees and requirements to own dispensaries, and so the regulation of dispensaries will be much more like the regulation of liquor stores or bars that sell alcohol than the previous practice, and it will give the state some degree of control, and it will give communities some degree of control, so that there will be a little bit of order brought into a process that was pretty disorderly before. For patients, it's not going to make much change. The biggest issue with marijuana purchase for medical purposes is that the Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, considers all forms of marijuana to be Schedule 1, which means having no medical use. Obviously a ridiculous position, since I've just talked about the scientific evidence and the fact that marijuana compounds have been approved in other countries. But nonetheless, that's the law of the land. It was just reaffirmed in August of this year that is the status. What the DEA has said, however, is that, at least up till now, that their agents are supposed to leave people alone if they're following the state guidelines of where they live. So for the average citizen, there isn't much that they have to worry about as long as they are, only have in their possession reasonable amounts. They can grow, I think, up to 12 plants in their own home, and it has to be grown in a secure fashion. And that there are obvious reasons for that, that they don't want a plant that has potential abuse potential, not carefully managed. And I can tell you just from a patient experience, I had one patient who was growing in his backyard and carefully watching 1 or 2 plants, and just before it was harvest time a couple of years ago, somebody snuck in the middle of the night and stole his plants. So there are many reasons why the plants need to be grown in a secure fashion.
Right. So what is the range of practice and opinion among neurologists, epileptologists, and general practitioners in terms of supporting patients in their efforts to access cannabis? And what do you recommend patients do if they can't find someone to complete the physician portion of the application and then assist them with their use of cannabis?
Well, on one extreme, there are doctors who want nothing to do with this. And at the other extreme, there are doctors who say, yes, this is a reasonable medical compound for the problems that a person might have, and then every variation in between. So I think it's an important question just to first is to ask, as a patient, your physician about how they feel about using medical marijuana for their particular medical problem, and if they work with their doctor if it seems to be a reasonable reason to do that. If they feel that this is something they want to use and their doctor isn't, willing to, kind of help guide them, then it's probably time to talk to somebody else who might be more amenable to the use of a medical marijuana compound for their medical problem.
Right, and unfortunately, there's obviously no directory of physicians that would say.
Yeah, but I think one has to. But
go ahead.
Like any drug, there are reasons to be cautious about things. For example, we know that THC, the compound that makes people feel high when they smoke marijuana, has been tested extensively over the years for the effects on learning and memory in children and adolescents. And there may well be, or there are negative effects on concentration, learning, and memory in adolescents who use THC cannabis. There are animal studies of fetal animals exposed to THC where it can have adverse effects, and even under certain circumstances can produce seizures in fetal animals. So pregnant women, for example, should not be using cannabis. The CBD data, in terms of cognitive effects, is much scantier. But the good news is that the Epidemics trials includes studies of the neuropsychological effects. So we're going to be learning quite a bit about the effects of CBD on learning, memory, and the like from these trials and other attempts to, use medical grade CBD in other studies.
Right.
So I think that, to say that a physician is reluctant to talk about the use of cannabis isn't. I think there are legitimate medical reasons why a doctor may or may not think that's appropriate for a particular patient in many different circumstances.
Sure. So people may choose to grow their own cannabis, but most people likely obtain cannabis through dispensaries or provisioning centers. And up until recently, there's been, lack of regulation, and there's a lot of variability in the growing and extraction methods that can negatively affect the consistency or safety of the product. So what are the most important questions to ask when selecting a supplier so as to maximize the quality of both the product and any advice that may be given by that provisioning center?
Well, I think you want to know what the chemical analysis of what you're purchasing is. There should be a high quality chemical analysis of what you're getting, and not only for how much CBD or THC and the ratios of that, but what are the other kinds of compounds used to extract this. So, is it in olive oil, or is it in sesame seed oil, or what kind of oil? Because some of these extraction methods can use pretty toxic chemicals. Were the plants grown with exposure to pesticides? Are there residual pesticides seen in the product? Those are the kinds of things that a good quality testing laboratory can tell you about. In general, it's easier to do chemical analysis of the flower portion of the cannabis plant than it is in the products that are made into cookies or gummy bears or things like that, because it's a little trickier process. But I think if you're taking something as medicine, that you shouldn't just blindly accept that this is good for you because it's being sold as medicine. You should want to know when was it last tested? Was it this batch, and what exactly are you taking in as a medication?
Right. Now, in terms of dosing for cannabis, are there any existing guidelines, either from the U.S. or from other countries? And if so, what are they? And if not, who can patients rely on to provide guidance with dosing?
We know from the Epidemics trials that they have been using a dose of 20 milligrams per kilogram per day at the high end. The lower end is 10 milligrams per kilogram per day. For a person who weighs about 150 pounds, that is about 20 milligrams per kilogram per day is around 1,500 milligrams per day. I have very few patients who have anywhere close to that dose for their use because it's too expensive. Most people start with a dose of around 25 milligrams per day, and they build upward as needed. Now, one of the things one has to realize about CBD is that when CBD is taken on a daily basis, that it is broken down into other compounds, and one of the compounds that it is broken down into gradually increases in concentration. It's called 7-carboxy CBD, and its metabolism by the third week of therapy, the level of that is more than 10 times higher than the concentrations of CBD alone. So one of the things one has to do when using CBD as a medication is to be patient and to realize that when you start using it, that you probably won't see the maximum benefit for 3 to 4 weeks at a particular dose. So it's similar to other drugs we have with a long half-life, such as phenobarbital.
Okay. And I assume the best individual to assist with dosing and coming up with a dosing schedule is the neurologist or physician. But I would imagine that some of the provisioning centers probably provide information on that as well. Is it something that you would want to talk with both parties about, or rely more on your neurologist?
Well, I think that one should always listen to what people are taking, but I think that when non-medically trained specialists are giving advice, one has to take that with a grain of salt.
Right.
So, I've had patients come in and tell me that they have a pure indica or pure sativa strain. Well, there aren't any kind of strains of cannabis, as I mentioned earlier. There are ones that may be largely one or the other, but these have all been crossbred for thousands of years, and so the strains have certain characteristics, and the mixture of the compounds in them make different feelings or have different kinds of effects, and people may be able to describe how they might feel when using them, but as far as medical advice, I think one has to take that with a grain of salt. I think the simple way to look at this is that if you're going to start using a cannabinoid, you should be working with your physician, that you should start at a low dose and, plan, if you're taking oral CBD, then you should probably plan on staying with the dose for 3 or 4 weeks before deciding whether you move up to a higher dose or not, depending on how you're responding to it.
Makes sense. So what is the average cost or price range for a month's supply of CBD or other cannabis product? And does higher cost necessarily imply higher quality? And then also, are there any financial assistance programs available?
Well, the last part of that is easiest. No, it's you're on your own. If you buy it over the internet, you can use your charge card, but because of the DEA ruling that cannabis has no medical use, the federally chartered banks can't even give accounts to cannabis producers, the charge card companies won't let them use their charge card, so it's an all-cash business. And that, because when you have large amounts of cash changing hands, that leaves it wide open for people who may not be totally scrupulous. So it's no different than somebody running a coin-operated laundry than it is a cannabis dispensary. If a person has a mind to bend the law, then they can be, you might have shenanigans going on. So one has to be careful about where one goes to dispensaries. The second thing is that for the hemp oils, those are, because hemp oil was part of the last revision of the Farm Bill, it can be sold. You can buy hemp products that for seeds to eat and all kinds of stuff that have no CBD in them at all, nor do they have any THC. You can go to any major chain grocery store and find hemp seeds, but these do not have any of the compounds we've been talking about today. You can buy the CBD oils that are called hemp oils over the internet, and you can use your charge card for that. And then the price is going to be whatever the individual thinks they can get away with in terms of the market. So the internet prices may be more or less standardized. The prices in dispensaries may have a more regional variation based upon how much it costs to run the shop and what the customers are willing to pay. So I know of some patients who are spending hundreds of dollars a month for cannabis products, and so it can be quite pricey, but it's all done without any coverage by any insurance companies so far.
Okay. We've talked about some of the legal aspects, but can you just provide a brief overview of what patients should know about cannabis use from a legal standpoint?
So if you're using marijuana, then if you don't have a card, you're taking a chance. If you're buying it off the street or from a friend who's growing it, then you are taking a chance legally. If you go through the application process, it's pretty straightforward and gives you protection from getting arrested for having marijuana in your possession. There are common sense kinds of things. Since we're talking about epilepsy, we don't have to worry about driving, since people with epilepsy who's had a seizure in the last 6 months aren't supposed to drive in Michigan. But if you're using cannabis that has THC in it, it affects your driving ability, and so you shouldn't use it and go out and drive a car if you haven't, even if you are seizure free. So I think you have to be aware of common sense things like that. Just as if you have epilepsy, you shouldn't be climbing around fixing your roof or cleaning your gutters or things where you had a seizure, you might fall and injure yourself.
Right. So we've also mentioned a little bit about hemp oil and purchasing products over the internet, which then presumably are shipped across state lines. I'm looking at epilepsy.com on their medical marijuana page. It does say that it's illegal for patients to carry medical cannabis across state lines or have products shipped to them. And it says companies will often label CBD products as hemp extract to skirt the laws, but if the product has CBD in it, then it is a Schedule I substance and is illegal to ship it across state lines. Is that inaccurate, or is I'm trying to figure out what the current law is on that?
Well, I would say that if you have THC in cannabis, then you would be, there's no legality of transporting that across state lines. The CBD is maybe a little bit different, but I think you're also taking a chance. I mean, for example, if you're going into an airport and you've got a cannabis product with you. Anybody who's been in the airport knows there are dogs that are being, with the Homeland Security folks, and they have pretty sensitive noses, and I don't think that the dogs makes much difference whether it's THC or CBD. So
right.
I think that one wants to be careful when going across straight lines. As I mentioned, you can buy hemp oil pretty much anywhere, and so you can make arrangements to have one of these internet hemp oils with high CBD delivered if you're traveling from where you're ending up, and that might be a safer strategy. I had a patient in just this past week who has found a great deal of benefit with CBD and has refused to fly to visit the spouse's relatives in another state far across the country for that reason. Whether that's the real reason or they maybe just didn't want to go see the in-laws, I don't know, but I said you could probably, you certainly have valid reasons to be concerned about taking cannabis on an airplane.
Sure. So what's your opinion on when someone should consider cannabis as a treatment for epilepsy? Do you feel that someone should exhaust all other options first, like medication, surgery, neurostimulation, ketogenic diet, or is it sometimes appropriate to try cannabis before exploring more established treatment options?
Well, first of all, if you have epilepsy and your seizures haven't been controlled, and you're thinking about trying marijuana, I think you want to make sure that you have the proper diagnosis. And so there are epilepsy syndromes that are easily controlled with the right medication and are uncontrolled with the wrong medication. The most common one is a syndrome called juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, which makes up perhaps as many as 10% of all people with epilepsy. And if people take the older drugs like carbamazepine or phenytoin, their seizures will be worse when they rather than better. And if they're on the right medication, then such as levetiracetam or Lamotrigine or other drugs, they'll be highly likely be seizure free. So you want to make sure you have the right diagnosis, and if you're having focal seizures and they haven't responded to a couple different medications, you should see a comprehensive epilepsy program and make sure that to see if you might be a candidate for epilepsy surgery, where you could potentially have your seizures cured by surgery. So I think this is not something one just takes without a good deal of thought and a proper evaluation in the first place.
Right. Okay. So before we open it up for discussion, did you have any closing thoughts or words of advice that you wanted to share?
Well, I do think this is a promising new development in the field of epilepsy, and that we probably will see over the next decade a number of products that will be developed based upon cannabinoids that were found originally in the marijuana plant, and that there are going to be other uses. The company that makes Dialects has just done a study with a preparation of the 50-50 THC and CBD as a treatment for one of the worst kinds of malignant brain tumors, and very early studies showed promise. So cannabinoids are being looked at for treatment of lots of medical problems, and we are probably at the beginning of a 10 to 20 year discovery process to find exactly what the right dose, the right time, and the right compound is for a number of medical problems that have been resistant to therapy.
Great. So before we open it up for Q&A, I also wanted to remind listeners that you can contact Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan at 1-800-377-6226 or visit our website at epilepsymichigan.org for more information on this and other epilepsy-related topics. So I am going to open it up for questions and discussion now. Sorry.
Hi, and Dr. Barkley, this is Carla Boyd. I'm hoping I can jump in with some Epidiolex questions.
Okay, I didn't hear who is this?
First of all, it's Carla Boyd, and thank you so much for this call. This is fantastic. Do you have a couple questions about Epidiolex? I have a daughter, a 15-year-old with JME, Juvenile Myoclonic Epilepsy. And my question about Epidiolex, if it's approved in 2018, will doctors be able to prescribe it for other seizure syndromes other than Dravet or Lennox-Gastaut?
So doctors can prescribe it once if and when it gets approved. A physician can write for any drug for any reason. But the other side of the coin is, depending on how much it costs, the insurance companies may put restrictions on the who can get it and under what kind of circumstances and how much they're willing to cover. Now, if the cost of a drug that's not yet approved is uncertain, but there have been articles in newspapers that the company has projected that the cost of this may be quite high, maybe as high as $1,000 a week. So,
wow.
Whether that holds true or is just speculation, one can only wait and see. That puts it in the same cost. The higher it is priced, more insurance companies are going to resist approving it for use and may restrict it to the very narrowest of indications. So
that makes sense.
On the other hand, you know, this is a product that, depending on how much of a green thumb you have, you could actually grow it in your backyard, and you can't say that for very many medications.
That's a great point. My second question is, in your clinic experience, anecdotally, have you seen equal success with hemp oil-derived products and CBD derived from marijuana plants?
So I think this is kind of an artificial distinction. To me, saying that there's a cannabis plant that has no THC is a hemp plant, and a cannabis plant that has THC is a marijuana plant is like saying that a Honeycrisp is an apple and a Red Delicious is something else. I mean, they're both apples. They happen to be different kinds of apples. But the hemp plant is a cannabis plant. And it just happens to be, so the key element is how much CBD are you getting, and what other kinds of things are in the chemical analysis of the product you're using.
Got it. Thank you.
I have patients that are using hemp-derived stuff they buy over the internet. I have people that are using products that are bought in marijuana dispensaries. In fact, I know of one, I'm not going to mention the brand name, a couple of them I can tell you that it's the same product that's bought in the dispensary that's bought over the internet.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Sandy.
This is Marissa Morgan calling.
Okay, so
I have a question.
Excuse me, Marissa, we'll go with Sandy first and then Marissa, okay?
Oh.
This is sort of like a game show. Whoever presses the button first gets the question.
I am calling on behalf of my granddaughter who's 3, and she has ESUS. And any doctor that we take her to, none of them, they're all reluctant to even talk about cannabis. And we would like to try the CBD oil for her. But how do you determine how much to give? And in your Epidemics study, you said that you guys were using the sesame-based CBD 100 milligrams per ml.
Yes.
Is that the same that you would buy from a...
So I'm sorry about your granddaughter having such a difficult to control epilepsy syndrome.
Thank you. It's horrible.
But this is a syndrome that may well respond to CBD. And depending on where you live, pediatric neurologists who specialize in epilepsy can help guide you. I would say that you, as in the case with all children, you will use a dosage based upon how much your granddaughter weighs, and you would start at a low dose, and depending on what other medications she's on, she may be taking clobazam, for example. One has to take that into account with dosing directions, and then work carefully to adjust the dose.
That's the biggest problem, though. The doctors, that's what they say. They don't know how to dose, and they're reluctant to even talk about it. She was with U of M. We recently switched over to Beaumont, and they're a little bit more open. They'll still see her and treat her. However, they cannot dose or recommend or anything.
Well, I know of pediatric epilepsy specialists who use and help guide the dosing of CBD in their patients. But I think for all of you who are thinking about appointments, I think it's the point of contact probably would be through the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan, because I don't want to make this sound like an advertisement for.
I understand.
Sure. Yeah, we could
for me or people I know.
Yeah, we have a professional advisory committee, and I think that might be a good thing, a good question we can ask of our professional advisory committee is just kind of a survey question about how comfortable are you with working with patients.
Yeah, I actually am the chair. I'm the chair of that committee for the foundation. So we didn't ask that at our last meeting, but we'll put that. Maybe we'll put that through the listserv, Russ.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and shoot you an email, Russ, and thank you, Dr. Barkley.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Marissa, you had a question?
Yes, I would like to find out your perspective of the cannabis either helping or hindering the memory brain cells.
So, as I mentioned, in the studies on adolescents taking THC, that those high THC compounds tend to impair learning and memory. So far, we don't have much information back yet from the trials that are underway with the Epidiolex, but at least the preliminary indication is it doesn't seem to, and these are in children, this hasn't shown to be an issue, but it's really early in the process. I think it's fair to say that with anybody with epilepsy, that probably one of the first questions that gets asked after talking about control of seizures is problems with memory. And memory problems may be due to where the seizures are coming from, or the medications, or the epilepsy itself, or some combination of the three. So if you find a therapy that actually controls seizures better, most of the evidence says that helps people's memory work better. And certainly some of the seizure medicines we use have more negative effects on memory than others. So this is a question that is very pertinent, but it's one that can be simply answered with a yes or no answer.
Okay. Well, the reason why I'm asking that, I'm 60 years old, and back in the early 90s, I did use cannabis in 91, 92, but then in 99, I was diagnosed with having the epilepsy seizures. And then also I had brain tumor and a stroke all at the same time. And with this, I'm kind of wondering, by being 60, almost 61, I'm concerned about my memory. I don't want it to have me to go down the road of early stages of dementia.
So you obviously have mentioned several reasons why you could have trouble with your memory. in terms of maximizing memory function, we know that there are several good things that one can do. One of the most important things is making sure you get adequate sleep at night. Another important way to help boost your memory is to have a good exercise regimen, because when you exercise vigorously, it helps the nerve cells in the temporal lobes that are important for memory function to sprout new fibers and help develop.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another question?
Dr. Barkley? Dr. Barkley?
Go ahead.
Yes?
This is Nancy. In reference, hi. In reference to the past caller, since I've been on CBD oil for 14 months and have been seizure-free, and I am older, I find that there's been no negative effect at all on memory, and it's been a good thing for me.
Yeah.
And
thanks for
I use
that
the
testimonial, Nancy. And
You're welcome.
It's wonderful news after all that we've gone through trying to get your seizures controlled, to hear that this has been a sustained benefit for you.
Yes, I like it.
Great. Thanks, Nancy.
Okay.
Thanks, Nancy.
Sure.
Someone else had a question?
I had a question regarding the ethos.
Yes?
I'm Jessica. This is Sandy's daughter-in-law. Have you ever seen it reduce spike waves? Like, have you ever worked with it in that?
Well, I'm an adult epilepsy specialist, and so I haven't personally treated any children with this syndrome in quite a while. But we have 2 pediatric epilepsy specialists in our department, and so those are the 2 doctors who would be involved with caring for someone in our department. I haven't run across any articles, and per se that I can think of off the top of my head. I know that in the compassionate use data of Epidiolex, there were a lot of different types of epilepsy syndromes that were treated in those compassionate use patients. And there might be, I know the GW website, the company that makes Epidiolex, it's called GW Pharmaceuticals. I'm not sure exactly what their website. They have some of the posters available on their website of the data that's been presented, and you might see if there is any of the stuff on their posters in the compassionate use population, because they had several hundred patients that they have compiled. The other thing that one can always do when looking at the scientific literature is go to PubMed, PUBMED.gov, and then you could type in the search terms that you want. You might have to put out the whole name of the syndrome rather than the initials, but try just the 4 initials first.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have about 5 minutes left, so other questions? Anyone who hasn't asked a question so far?
Well, this is Marissa again. I just want to quickly ask, what does CBD stand for?
Sure, good question. I hoped I had defined it earlier, but maybe I didn't. It stands for cannabidiol.
Okay.
So it's a tongue twister of a word, so it's easy to say CBD rather than cannabidiol.
Okay.
But that's the compound that is the ingredient in the Epidiolex oil that's being developed for clinical approval by the FDA, and it's also the major component in many of the medical marijuana products for epilepsy.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, it's Carla again. One question about the role of THCA Dr. Barkley, I've seen things here and there that some people do incorporate that, and just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So, as I said earlier, the science of the cannabinoids for the treatment of epilepsy and other medical conditions is really in the infancy. And when one takes almost any compound, it is broken down into a number of other products. And so, to give you an example of existing drugs, the Carbamazepine is the parent drug which was marketed as Tegretol or Carbatrol for many years. One of its compounds it's broken down into is oxcarbazepine, which was marketed as Trileptal. Valium, which is diazepam, has one of its breakdown products is lorazepam, which is marketed as Ativan. So, in answering your question, these various members of the THC family will have similar or slightly altered, identical or sometimes slightly altered side effects from the parent compound. They may have because they're part of the breakdown pathway, they may have fewer side effects or more side effects, or their half-life might be longer or shorter. So there are a lot of factors that go into which of these compounds may have the most benefit, and I think we don't have enough science to be able to answer that at this time.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
When going to a dispensary, and looking for CBD oils, they have more than one. How do you choose for a child? And if they do have Charlotte's Web and it's available, would that be the recommended product for a child with ESUS?
So I think one wants to, I think there are several things. When you go to a dispensary and they give you, so one of the things about dispensaries is some of the dispensaries don't even carry CBD products at all. They're only selling high THC compounds. And so when you go in there, you're saying, I'm interested in a CBD product without THC, is particularly as a parent of a child, that's what you're going to want to ask for.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of it, they'll say we have A, B, and C. You say, okay, let me see the chemical analysis of A, B, and C so I know exactly what I'm getting, the concentrations, and whether or not it's been tested for pesticides and all that kind of thing. If they don't provide that for you, you might look at other dispensaries, or an alternative is you can go and there are cannabis testing laboratories in Michigan that will do the testing and provide you a detailed analysis of not only the cannabinoids, but what kind of solvents might be in there, whether or not there are any pesticides or herbicides or anything like that, so you know you're giving your child a product that is safe.
Okay, and if you go to buy a product that's branded, like Charlotte's Web, can you count on it being the same each and every time?
I haven't looked at their website recently. I know they just changed their website, but I believe that many of these, the last time I looked at some of these hemp oil products, some of them had very careful or detailed chemical analysis, and others did not. And if there's any question, you could certainly call or write them and say, before I buy this, I want to have a chemical analysis of what I'm getting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hi, Linda, one quick question here.
Go ahead.
We just recently moved over the state line into Indiana from Michigan. Are we able to use any of the facilities or cards or anything in Michigan, or are we now out of luck? And if so, do you have resources that we can use for Indiana?
I know of a couple people who have established Michigan addresses from other states in order to get a card to buy cannabis in Michigan, and I presume they're giving that while they're in Michigan with their child. The hemp oils, I can't speak to what the Indiana ruling is, but I believe there was a graph in the Free Press on Sunday in the Michigan medical marijuana laws, and they had a map of the United States with color coded with what are the laws in different states. But I believe that you probably are able to get hemp oil in Indiana for your child.
Okay. And any other question?
We can help with that too. If you want to contact us, we can do some research on that as well.
There probably is there may be
Foundation of Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there may be there used to be in Indianapolis. There was a branch of the Epilepsy Foundation.
Yeah, there is a small affiliate in Indiana that I can refer you to as well.
Okay, and I would get that by calling your office.
Yep. Okay, we should.
I have a question in regards to tuberous sclerosis.
Okay, quick.
Go ahead.
Please.
Okay, you mentioned that in the beginning of the phone call, and so I'm wondering what the success has been for seizure control with tuberous sclerosis.
So in the Epidemics trial, they are actually testing it right now in tuberous sclerosis. We don't have the results from that. But tuberous sclerosis, there are a number of options that can be done there. Those include, because of the gene abnormality in tuberous sclerosis, one of the things to talk with specialists is about the use of what are called mTOR inhibitors like rapamycin that can block the abnormal gene action and may control seizures and help with stopping or reversing the growth of some of the abnormal growth associated with the disorder. It also has been shown that drugs like that have improved cognition in people with tuberous sclerosis in some cases.
We're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and if people do have additional questions, please email them to me or call me. I want to thank you, Dr. Barkley, for a great comprehensive call, and we touched on a lot of different topics, so I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everyone participating today.
Thank you, Les. This was a lot of fun, and I hope it was informative to everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, it was.